Welcome to a new edition of Podcast. This is Potty Science. What is the definition of science? Well, that is knowledge or a system of knowledge covering general truths or the operation of general... what's that word?
Patent.
No, general...
I wrote this, so here we
read
go.
it.
Knowledge or a system of knowledge covering general truths or the operation of general laws, especially as obtained and tested through the scientific method, which will be the topic of the day, which will be the next section that we do. But there you go.
This
There's your
is
card.
Potty Science.
Potty
Now,
science.
let's talk scientific method. All right, so here's the list by Francis Bacon.
Yes.
What a cool name. Francis Bacon.
He is awesome at breakfast.
Empirical, measurable evidence, data. Systemic observation, measurement, experiment, formulation, testing, and then modification of a hypothesis. A hypothesis is an educated guess, if you didn't know.
Hey, there you go. So the cool thing about the scientific method, and it varies from what he read, and it's obviously at the bottom here, but the scientific method varies quite a bit. But the point is you make an observation, you can test that observation, and if that experiment does not jive with your observation, then you go back and you make adjustments and everything. But there's two amazing things about the scientific method that to basically sum that up, because the scientific method depends on who you talk to, what the list is. But the biggest thing is prediction. It has to be able to predict things and predict things reliably. And that is a huge part of the scientific process. But the other part is the openness of science. It is a social construct to where you throw it out to everyone, and whatever your hypothesis is, whatever your theory is, you put it out to everybody. You don't hide anything, and everyone else can test what you hypothesize.
Well, let's talk about some hypothesis. What do you got here?
Well, I actually kind of have a little bit of a history to lead to the scientific method, which you just mentioned, Francis Bacon, but there's...
Bacon.
Yes, with some, yes, and I want to throw pepper in there so bad.
Throw tomatoes?
But the great thing about the scientific method and how it ended up where it is it's kind of common sense. You look at something, you see what you can do to see if that thing happens again. Whatever that is, that's the scientific method. I mean, you can, nuts and bolts it down to that, but you have to be able to go through that several times.
So
that's based on perspective.
yes, that's
It's
perfect.
based on what you know. It's based on what you've experienced already. 'Cause that's all
Yes,
you know.
yes, to
How
initiate
can
that,
you
absolutely.
absorb
And
what's going
that
on
is
around
that.
you if you don't understand it?
So imagine yourself back in Greek and pre-Greek times, where you see the sunrise come up or whatever all these things are. You can. I'm trying to focus a little bit, and I'm Captain ADHD. I should have a little shield that says, "Oh, what is?"
Alcohol. All right, so let's talk science.
Which Galen, alcohol relates to Galen. This is the most ADHD moment of the night, and enjoy this while you can.
No, it's not.
Galen, when you get to buy, at the end of this little podcast, we're going to go to books and biographies, and we'll throw that in there. And Galen is one of the people that we're going to put into the biographies, and he used wine as an antiseptic back in Roman times. He didn't know why, but he did it because it worked. And that's the scientific method.
Antiseptic, what do you mean?
So when medical hospitals and all that stuff, you can get these little alcohol, basically, rubbing alcohol. Like if you ever cut yourself or whatever, you want to put alcohol in there, it kills infections.
I've seen that in Rambo.
Yeah, so it kills infections and everything. But Galen, back in the Roman times, he used wine. He would dip sponges in wine and then rub it on the wound and stuff. But the alcohol would kill the bacteria and any infection. And infection I mean, now that we're living in where we're at now, we don't see it as that big of a deal. But back in the day, infection was insanely awful, right? I mean,
But they knew a little bit how to take care of it.
Yes. Yeah, and if
Yeah.
you could get like a little cut, and you know that little nasty pus or whatever you get around a cut and everything, if it doesn't get treated, like hydrogen peroxide, a lot of people use hydrogen peroxide, Neosporin and any of this stuff, it destroys
They
bacteria.
didn't have that back then.
Yeah, no, but that's what I'm saying, like now with
Neo.
Neo, that means Neosporin. And all that, but it would destroy bacteria and anything that would build
Right.
in an awful manner. And all
So
that.
you're saying today's standards versus medieval standards, they would just use alcohol, but now we use like actual medicine.
Well, ironically, we still actually use alcohol for the most part.
Is that right?
And it's odd that you would say, so I'm Captain Tangent and Captain ADHD, but since you said medieval standards, I want to go through the history of science and how it grew from, let's say, Babylonians to Egyptians to Greeks to Romans, and then it just went, so I'm going to put it down here, but there's a little exponential growth of science as it goes up, and then it takes a little dump through the Dark Ages, and then it goes up again. But the reason why it takes a dump through the Dark Ages is through all of the scientific growth and everything, religion, basically. I'm just, let's just...
Fucking religion is...
Let's just throw that in
Hold on,
there.
are you saying
Right?
religion interferes with science?
Sure,
Is that what
though.
you're saying?
But,
There was so much
so
more going on
I
with
do,
what they were
but I do want...
putting their efforts in.
Since we got into this and the little political thing, the one thing I do want to throw in there, and being a political person or whatever, but with science, one thing that drives me fucking crazy is when liberals say, do you believe in science? I fucking hate that question.
And why?
Because, first of all, science is not a thing. It's a method. It is not a thing.
So you think
It's a formula.
mysticism
Yes,
actually has
it
a
is
part.
a tool to
Yes.
achieve knowledge,
It's
the
still
truth,
know-how.
quote unquote, the truth or whatever. But when you ask, as a liberal myself or whatever, but if I was to say somebody, do you believe in science? To me, I feel like I'm being rude in a way, because what I'm kind of asking is, do you believe in God or science? And there's a way you can believe in both. And I truly believe that, but I think liberals are awesome, because I'm one of them or whatever, but I'm not awesome. I'm a horrible human being. But I think that liberals in general, I don't want to challenge all, oh my God, I can't believe I'm getting political with the science
I don't want to
thing,
say this,
anyways,
but
yes.
you're saying there's a difference between science and mysticism. And
Yes. You know,
science
and
has
that's...
its place, and mysticism has its place as
It's
well.
feeling and the
Yes, and
the reality of what the chain reactions. of
in
things that are going
science,
on.
okay, so math is a tool that science uses, say physics or what have you, especially physics or whatever. But math is a tool that science uses. Science is a tool that we use as
To
a
understand.
species, yes, to find the, and this is the mind-blowing part, and we'll get into this the next part, but science can never prove something is true, is real. Science can only prove what is not true.
But it's only what we say. This is what
Yes.
our
Science can.
mankind says this is what is.
Science
How
can't
is that
kind of
even?
tell.
But we can test that. Anything you say or anything you question, we can test that. And, well,
Sure, in our own
let me
scope
take that
of
back.
Understanding.
Yes.
But still, there's so much more out there than.
Exactly, and that's where mysticism comes in. And that is the next part we're going to talk about, is being a
shit.
mystic.
All right, when we come back, we're going to talk about mysticism versus science.
Not versus, they're not against each other.
They're not against each other. They're working
like
hand
to
in
now.
hand.
Yeah, well, that's
Hand
true.
in hand. On potty science.
Technology is something that we have to judiciously do. Science must happen rampantly. Mysticism must happen rampantly, because this is simply exploratory. This is not about seeing how to make it useful. But today, modern science has become a slave of technology. If you don't make it useful, nobody is going to fund you anymore. If you simply say, I want to know, nobody's interested in this. How can it be turned into an enterprise? That's all they're interested in. This is the wrong way to approach science, because science is a fundamental need within a human being wanting to know. It's the nature of human intelligence. It is not something that somebody made up. It's not a bunch of scientists who made this up. This is a fundamental need within human intelligence wanting to know. It is the nature of a human being, if he sees something new, he wants to know what this is, whether it's a small thing or a big thing. So to continuously sustain that wonder, that sense of wanting to know, is the basis of science and mysticism.
Welcome back to Potty Science. We're talking the difference between mysticism and science. So we're gonna go into Jeremy Borden.
We all want to be
We're gonna go right
Let's
inside
go into
him.
that.
one
Scientifically.
It's a lovely place.
I speak for yourself,
damn.
That was
mister.
my contribution to this
It's a
science segment.
fantasy.
All right,
And
so
there's still going to be a
mysticism
cut right
versus science. Where does that come into play? Like,
there. Well, there are two scientists throughout history that are kind of two of my favorites, and one is Pythagoras. Talk to you then. Pythagoras back in the Greek times, which is the Pythagorean theorem, and many other things of Pythagoras. And Newton. I'll throw that to the side, but we'll get back to Pythagoras. And the reason why I like both of these is they were scientists that really depended on truth and what happened, which is, you know what I mean, like provable things to a point with Pythagoras, which we'll get to a point eventually here. Don't want to say point too many times. But they looked
Because then
beyond
it'll be a shape.
many, many, many,
many shapes.
yes.
Is that what we're talking about?
Manny faces from He-Man. But both of them looked at science and like truth, something you could verify and all that, right? But they would, they expected something beyond. And Pythagoras was, kind of at the transition where, your cavemen to a degree, where they would look at the stars and think, Zeus and the gods and all this.
Some of my gray hair. I
Yeah,
was there.
they would be very mixed, both of those things. But Newton blows me away, actually, in a way, because he was a very religious person, and everything that he did, he is the most specific and detailed scientist that you could get to, but at the end, he still considered himself a mystic, which is what we were talking about.
But Newton discovered the
Everything.
gravity and physics.
Yes.
He was kind of a pioneer.
Well,
and it makes those Fig Newton cookies.
yes,
fucking
and the
delicious.
Which are
figs
amazing.
are the best of the Newtons. Absolutely. And
Are they cookies
but
or
he
cake?
did optics as well.
They're cakes.
The Principia Mathematica is one of the most amazing.
Principia Mathematica?
Yeah, which is Newton wrote, which it includes, and he discovered calculus, which some would say, oh, I can't remember his name. He's a German dude. I'll put it down here, starts with a G, whatever. But anyways, he discovered calculus.
Sauerkraut.
Gesundheit.
Yes, yes.
Fuck you.
He had good
I was
health.
waiting. I was like, God damn it.
Yeah, and then so Newton, but they were mystics. So they were willing to accept, you show me this, and accepted reality as it was, but they felt like there was something beyond that reality that you could show me on paper, or.
So they were able to take a mystic
They were
theory.
looking for something
and
beyond,
put it on paper.
They don't know. No one
Yes.
knows.
and they were honest about it. I kind of think most scientists, I kind of consider myself.
Scientists these days can be bribed, can be manipulated. It's where the money follow the money, as I say.
Oh, dude.
But there is still some
not
good
a true
scientists.
scientist cannot be bribed. No, that is
Check this
so.
out.
That is
Is it
so.
science?
Oh, it's bullshit.
No, that is awful
Bullshit.
as well.
That's
That's
Based
mysticism.
on
But science. But
Humanitarianism.
okay, so here.
That's
But
what
I'll
it's
tell
based
you
on.
what. With what you said is kind of an interesting point. Even if you bribed a scientist, whatever that science is that they would bribe, can be tested within the community. The prediction and the
Right.
community is what makes science
God damn War of
science.
the Worlds right now.
Right? I mean,
Talk to me.
Fuck you.
That's not science.
I know. Yes, it is.
science
Straight
fiction
up.
is amazing because it's like philosophy, which is War of the
Nature can be
Worlds,
like, fuck
which
you, I'm
it
doing
leads
that.
you in a direction of what the possibilities
Okay,
are.
so what I'm reading right now, I have not read H.G. Wells. Oh my lord, War of the Worlds. I can't wait. I'm so much in.
It's almost about ready to come out. That's random, sorry.
Yeah.
Talk to me,
Distraction.
motherfucker.
I know.
Captain ADHD!
Fantastic.
All right, so you're reading War of the Worlds, H.G. Wells.
God damn it. I just forgot
Did I fuck you up?
it. No.
Or Jeremy did. Jeremy, great job.
Everything in the
excitement.
world is my fault.
Nah, go ahead.
But it is the War of the Worlds
Not
where they...
understanding. They don't understand where everything, why. So
Who doesn't?
they're,
Well, I will say the big
People
thing
of
with
the
War of the
world.
Worlds is where the big thing they wanted to say was learn to live with each other. Right? That's
what-
and
that's
it
what War of
was
the
what the
Worlds is
50s
now?
or the 60s,
that's
which is awesome. but-
exactly. That's
yeah.
what they're all trying to go for, and they don't even understand it.
Do you understand
No,
Jeremy
it's-
Allen?
I don't understand Jeremy Allen at all, dude. I've been trying to
Oh,
figure it out.
fantastic.
Oh, you're asking
Wait.
him.
So War of the Worlds
Oh.
is beyond just aliens coming to Earth and
Oh, fuck,
fucking
yes,
shit up.
it is.
You're saying it's a scientific method of them coming here and saying what?
Your mom.
Your mom.
I'm gonna go with that.
Yep.
That's
So random
that's the
thoughts
correct
here.
answer.
Thales
My last
in
answer.
the 7th century BC is the first person.
They came here to fuck your mom.
He was the first person to ever fuck your mom.
Porn of the world.
But the other one is Thales in the 7th century
Porn of
BC
the
is the
world.
first person to ever take something that's happening in the world and say that it's not caused by the gods. I mean, even now that we still have gods, which is
We're looking
deal
for
with
that.
it, whatever have you. But back then, they were, and this could be totally another potty science episode, but the fact that back in the day it was polytheistic and now it's monotheistic, and I think that's a psychological thing of society, but we'll get into that at some other point. But Thales in the 7th century BC is one of the first people to take a moment and explain things besides saying Zeus did this. You know, he took, I don't have a specific example, or do I?
So
no, I
Zeus
don't.
was a scientist.
Yes, and the topic thing, or the book and the biography that we're getting ready to get into after this here in a little bit, is Hippocrates and Galen, and they were medicine. And I think the scientific method where we talked about observation, experiment, and then, you know, the secular motion of the
Secular.
that feels weird to say.
Sounds
But
weird.
anyways,
Nuh-uh.
the
No, say it slowly.
proving and everything, but medicine is one of the most important things as a human being to study, right? Because it is life or death, literally.
Hold on.
So
What is life or death?
it
Secular?
is living or dying.
Living or dying.
Yes. So if life is if you live, and
Are
death,
we forever?
that is the point of the
Oh,
mystic.
fucking
That
Christ.
is the point of the mystic. So that is where, with potty science that we're doing now, is one of the things I want to kind of guide towards. And it is one thing that I'm a big fan of, is mysticism. And it is a thought of immortality, or what's real, or what's beyond us, and what we are as individuals. But Hippocrates and Galen are two medical people. One is, the Hippocratic Oath. There it is down at the bottom. But it is a very important part. But medicine is one of the leading sciences because of necessity. Now, there was also philosophy, which led into Francis Bacon in the 1600s, I believe, around there. We'll
I'll
check
go
it
with
out at
that.
the bottom.
Go with that.
But
I
the big
concur.
thing with before Francis Bacon, they were considered natural philosophers, and philosophy led into science. And I think philosophy is one of the core things, and I'm going to start ending this before one of these cameras die, but I think it is
My
very
Lord.
groovy.
All right. On the final note and before we get into the next section, mysticism. A person who seeks by contemplation and self-surrender to obtain unity with or, is that right, absorption into the deity or the absolute, or who belongs or believes in the spiritual apprehension of the truths that are, what's that word?
Yeah. So we'll
Beyond.
print it at the bottom, beyond the intellect. But the point of being a mystic, which is one thing I want to add to this, because so being internet and YouTube and all this, yeah, well, enjoy it while it lasts. Let's say you can watch the potty news for the other part.
Dude, science is fucked up.
But the big thing with what mysticism does with science, so science can technically kind of not be disputed unless you can dispute it.
I can dispute it.
Right, so weird.
I like
But-
turtles.
Physical
Yes,
shit.
but mysticism is
In a
truth
nutshell.
of self, truth of being, truth of entity, truth of soul, truth of who we are beyond all the physics and the chemistry and all
I would
these
almost say everybody here at this panel is scientific and mystic.
Yeah,
Is that right? Is that the
the
right
core
word?
mysticism is the beauty. And okay, so we're all artists. I feel confident definitely saying that we're all artists. And I consider myself also a scientist. But the one thing I love with the art that I do is I love taking science and making it an art. And there's a mystic nature to me with that. That you're looking beyond,
Games.
I guess. And period. There it is.
So you're looking beyond science, and there's things science can explain, and that's where the mysticism comes in, right?
Yes, and really the only thing that science, oh, I'm gone.
You go ahead.
That
When we
science,
come back, we're going to talk about mysticism versus science, because Jeremy Borden has me all fucked up. And Shannon fucked up, obviously. So we'll come back and
Fucked up.
join us
Fucked
for
up, Jeremy.
Potty Science.
Pythagoras of Samos was a Greek philosopher who lived around 570 BC and became one of the most influential philosophers of the classical Greek period, which might be surprising to you if you only know him as the triangle guy. In actual fact, Pythagoras' theorem, you know, the square of the hypotenuse of a right-angled triangle is equal to the sum of the squares of the remaining sides, is kind of a misnomer because it's unlikely that Pythagoras actually discovered that. But his reputation as the triangle guy isn't actually that far from the truth, because one thing we can be sure about is that Pythagoras was really, really into triangles. Pythagoras' obsession was with mathematics. In his early days, he travelled around Europe and spent some time living in Egypt, which had a blossoming academic community, and it's there that he's said to have developed his fascination with math. And let's be fair, if you spent 20 years staring at pyramids, you'd probably become obsessed with triangles too. According to legend, Pythagoras didn't really kick off his philosophical career until he was around 60 years old, at which point he settled down in the city of Croton in Italy, ranting about mathematics to anyone who would listen. As a result, Pythagoras was the first person to set up a school of philosophy, though in actual fact it wasn't so much a school as a cult. If you're into mathematics, then you might think that you're pretty nerdy, but at least you don't worship math as a literal religion. Presumably. But the Pythagoreans, as they were known, believed that numbers were the building blocks of reality, and in some sense they kind of are, but nowadays even the most devout students of math are much less inclined to murder people who insult mathematics. And by all accounts, the Pythagoreans were every bit as much of a crazy cult as Heaven's Gate or Scientology. They thought that numbers were literally God, specifically the number 10. In fact, the divine symbol of the Pythagoreans was the tetractys, 10 points arranged in the pattern of a triangle. What Pythagoras was working on here was an early form of the philosophical investigation of ontology, which investigates the nature of reality. This encompasses questions about the physical world, starting with what it actually even means to say something is real and moving up from there. You might assume this is a pretty easy question to answer. For example, you can say that horses exist, but unicorns do not. Boom, take that philosophy. But of course there's more to it than that. For example, do numbers exist? And if so, do they exist in the same way that horses exist? You might say that the number 7 is real, but the number 12 is not. But what does that mean? Are either of them real? Are they just functions of language, or something else, or neither? Believe it or not, the ontology of numbers is something that philosophers grapple with to this day. In this early stage of philosophical inquiry, philosophers were still kind of up in the air about what the fundamental unit, or primary substance of reality actually was. Thales of Miletus, who is usually credited as the first Greek philosopher, thought that the universe was fundamentally made out of water. Anaximenes believed that it was made out of air, and Heraclitus believed that it was made out of fire. Pythagoras disagreed with all of them and believed that the world was made out of numbers and that math was fundamentally the base unit of all reality. The Pythagoreans dedicated their lives to making mathematical discoveries, all of which Pythagoras himself was given personal credit for. For example, the fact that the sum of the angles in a triangle is equal to 180 degrees, as well as the concepts of square numbers and the whole idea of geometry. Pretty much everything that you learned in primary school mathematics could be traced back to something that Pythagoras, or more likely the followers of Pythagoras, discovered. On top of that, it's believed that the Pythagoreans were the first to work out that the Earth is a sphere.
Hey, welcome back to Potty Science. We were discussing the difference between science and mysticism. Mysticism, that's where, well, let me read that definition real quick. All right, mysticism, a person who seeks by contemplation and self-surrender to obtain unity with or absorption into the deity or the absolute. Did I say that right?
Yes.
All right. Or who believes in the spiritual apprehension of truths that are beyond the intellects. So, mysticism kind of guesses outside of science. Is that right?
Actually, it is, but it just made me feel uncomfortable for a minute just to use the word guess. But you are absolutely right. It is totally guessing outside.
So
the realms of
mysticism
science.
takes what's outside of science and comes to a conclusion based on what could be mystic powers, I guess.
Yes, but I would throw in
Science.
with that the true mystic doesn't come up with a conclusion. They have a hope.
They have a hope.
Yes, they have a.
But there's no mathematical.
Yes, that they have a
formula.
hope that there's something beyond. But what? So.
Me and Jeremy Allen live on hope.
Oh, yeah.
And I die without hope. But you want to like find. I'm alive again.
Damn.
I'm so alive again. But the thing with mystics is you look for something beyond. Okay, so and I'm like any, and again we said before with Pythagoras and Newton, which are my two favorites because they were honest about what they observed and thought about with everything. But I really think any scientist would accept that they, you don't look like, oh my God, I want to
So
think
it's a
of it.
possibility, but science can't explain it.
Yeah, so let's say, I don't want to use an example, but so.
So, like for instance, like Wiccanism. Is that a word?
Yes, and yes.
Why are you laughing, Shannon? Because
I'm
Wiccanism.
not a witch, I'm your wife.
All right,
I
so
know.
let's say they worship a tree, and the tree.
And they would be a druid, which would make sense for history's sake, because you would worship nature to a degree, right? So back in the day before, like Greeks are kind of Sumerians to a degree, but Greeks kind of secondarily. But think about cave paintings and what's important to you as a species or as an individual or as not. They didn't think about species, but as a close-knit family group. As
Right.
Neanderthals, you were probably 15, 20 people and all that, and you would do the cave paintings. Here's where you found a buffalo, and to go to that. But logic kind of led from that. So say you do a cave painting of buffalo are here on such and such a weather or
Poison.
such and such a day and all that.
They're now
You
extinct.
go there, yes, but at the time they would say, I'm going here to find dinner, and food and survival is obviously the primarily important part. Yes, yes, the primal existence of what you're trying to do initially. But now that where we're at now, and this is
Why can't we initiate that?
yeah, well, survival and all that. It's not quite as important now because
Why
now
not?
you can throw because of science, horticultural science, because of.
All that existed without
Yes.
us knowing about
But
it.
now we can go to a store and buy corn and beef and all that
And it's
and a lot of this
it's
is
right
because
there.
of science and everything.
We pay attention to it.
Yeah,
it's
so
right
back in Neanderthal time, their science was where's the buffalo. Now our science is where are we? Who are we? What are we?
Well,
And
one
that's
of the
what
big- one of the big debates is global warming. Now, there's also science versus mysticism.
It's a debate a bunch fucking idiots. But yeah, I hear you.
So you're saying there's science to support global warming? Is that what you're saying?
Let's just say there's no science to support not global warming.
All
What
right.
about the flat Earth theory?
All right.
People
flat Earth.
all around the globe are saying that it is fucking real.
But
Yeah, that's right.
But science says different. Is that what you're telling me?
Wait a minute. Against the wait a minute. Against the flat Earth theory, right?
Right.
Yes, obviously. And check this out.
I'm
So there
checking.
is a person back in Greek time. So there's a thought about like the Dark Ages and all this shit, and the Greeks, and up until the Dark Ages, which is when religion took over, it is amazing what changed, right? In the Library of Alexandria, a huge awfulness happened with humanity, and so you could go through Sumerians and then into Egyptians and then into Greeks and Romans or whatever, and then so I'm actually going to put this down at the bottom here. You have an exponential curve up, and then religion comes in. It goes down, and then it comes in through the Enlightenment, through through the Renaissance, and then the Enlightenment, and what we have now.
Wasn't-
Yes. So, but science was a big, through Victorian eras where, that happened and everything. But the thing that happened during the Dark Ages is they shunned a lot of that, and then the burning of the burning of the Alexandria Library.
They
Yeah,
burnt that
holy
down.
shit.
I really
Yeah.
think where we're at now, we could have jetpacks right now. I really believe that if it wasn't for this 200 to 500 year piece of poo that humans do to themselves, why would you not look for what's good and
Well, there's a piece of
things.
society that refuses to accept science. I'm not kidding. Like, there is people who will say the Earth is flat.
But okay, so
Vaccines
here's
don't
my
work.
answer to that.
How
And-
do
and-
we know?
And I hear what you're saying. And the beautiful thing is, if you don't believe any of this stuff, it doesn't fucking matter. Because it only takes a few scientists to discover the GPS system, which is based on Einstein's theory of relativity. It only takes a
It's
few
set.
people. One, which what we were, I wish I could, I'm going to put it down here anyway.
Yeah.
But there's a dude who took two sticks. One was in Greece, one was in Northern Africa. And at the same time, the Greeks knew the earth was round. So you flat earthers, it doesn't matter. I don't give a shit what you think. And if you did discover the earth was round, would you make a contribution to the future of humanity? No.
What would they
No, you would not. Oh, and by the way, History Channel,
Absolutely.
turn the fucking UFO shit off of your fucking shit. It is
Aliens.
not a documentary.
Aliens.
There are aliens. I believe there are aliens. They are not going to fly all the way to Earth and get a flat tire. It's not
They
going to
did.
fucking happen.
They did.
They
Well, they
did?
proved it.
According to H.G. Wells, they did.
Talk to me.
Fuck yeah.
Talk
That
to
is
me.
art.
damn it.
That is art.
That's all I've been reading
So,
right now.
like, H.G.
Oh, goddamn
Wells.
it.
H.G. Wells is, so is Orson Welles. 1984 is awesome.
But H.G. Wells did the War of the Worlds,
Yeah.
and he convinced a lot of people that aliens were invading.
Exactly. Oh, wait. It was something else.
That was?
No, but that was
The
brilliant.
news
But
feed. That was Night of the Living Dead. Sorry.
Well, nonetheless.
Yeah.
All right, so science has proven that
But
Earth
still,
is
yeah.
round. Just basically off gravity, or it's off of location,
Location.
distance.
That's. I'm so sorry.
and based on
longitude,
reality.
latitude, reality.
Yes, reality is a big key.
And we
on
have
that.
pictures from outer space to Earth showing Earth.
It doesn't even matter.
It doesn't matter, you're right.
No, it doesn't matter because the seclusion of people.
What do you mean the seclusion of people? Talk to me.
It's a big deal.
I'm interested.
Show me.
Go on.
I can't show you.
I can't
Well, I
say
mean,
seclusion.
what-
This big red
What
Batman
do you mean by
style.
the seclusion of people?
Fuck you, Joker.
Go on.
What's the seclusion of people? What do you mean by that?
Because you can have a little tiny area, and this thing happens.
You
know,
talking the Inhumans on the moon?
No.
Black Bolt.
No. Earth?
All right, so you have
On the Earth.
On the
a
Earth.
seclusion of people
Spell
on
with
the
enough.
Earth.
Okay, so you have this little tiny seclusion of area where something happens, and then these people are like yeah, this fucking happened. And they're like, yeah, well, I didn't see it. So, I don't know about you. Whatever, you're crazy. And then it goes further, and it goes into the news, and people are like, yeah, okay, because they didn't experience it.
Yep, what we call
further
tribalism.
And further and further, till it deludes itself, till it's just fancy. And
Which is
I
what's
read
called
that
tribalism,
in
but
news.
science can cut through all that. Science can say you could cut
Yes,
through.
but
Yes.
they're not willing to believe.
But
So
see, that
that's-
I politically I agree with you on that, but scientifically it doesn't matter. It only takes one person to know the
You think
scientific
that,
method,
But
right?
that's what we're expecting of the aliens, per se.
Yeah, I'm not
aliens
expecting.
because
Yeah.
of anything else out besides what we have.
Dude, this is like deeper and shit,
God
dude.
damn it.
Oh,
No, I mean, I'm
But
serious.
still,
This is like
that's,
deep.
you know, we think they're unified.
Me and Jeremy
We
Allen
think
are
everything
like
they
stumped.
do, everything else beyond us is unified. They know.
Everything
That
is
one thing
unified,
knows,
whether
so
it's unified or
they
not.
know.
It's unified.
But
in a
how come we don't
philosophical
know?
way. But,
Should we do
Because of the
one
one
more-
thing
one more
happens, how
section?
come we don't know?
Let's do another section because I don't have a piece
One
of
more
wood right here
section.
where my feet are.
Why
About
are we
violent
not in the communication
science.
of each other that we don't know? That this just happened. Fuck you. And
All right, science versus mysticism. We'll be right back.
Isaac Newton was born in the 17th century, when man still believed the cosmos revolved around the earth. He is known both as the father of modern science and the last of the great magicians.
Newton was an extraordinary intellect. He was able to concentrate for endless hours, and sometimes it seemed days on an issue. He could keep in mind all of the parts.
Newton vividly imagined his theories and only later backed them up with experiments, a practice now known as an altered state of consciousness.
People can do this by running or exercising. People can do it by fasting. People can do it by drinking or drugging. People can do it by prayer or meditation. There are many hypnotism. There are many venerable practices over thousands of years where people have altered their state of consciousness.
Well, I think creativity really requires something like the acceptance of intuition, acceptance of inspiration as the starting point for ideas that turn out to be profound, important, and even scientific ideas. If you open yourself to the cosmos, you will be filled with new knowledge.
Fascinating. He was born on Christmas Day. He was a widow's son. He was raised in a kind of austere surroundings and went off to college and kind of never stopped being at college, and studied the rest of his life. From a young man, he studied everything there was in the universe to study.
The Renaissance had been fueled by the rediscovery of long-lost early Greek and occult texts. Scholars like Newton were thrilled to discover new ideas in science, religion, and magic. Newton was not only a scientist, he was an avowed alchemist.
Most of the brilliant people in history, and Isaac Newton was one of them, went into alchemy, went into various occult pursuits because they wanted to find out how things work, and they were willing to go as far as they needed to satisfy their inquisitive minds.
In Newton's time, there was no hard distinction between magic, spirituality, and science. Scientists used any method to expand their knowledge. He spent years searching for the crown jewel of alchemy, the philosopher's stone. The stone was not an actual gem, but a higher level of consciousness that would enable scientific and spiritual breakthroughs. Alone in his room with his alchemical experiments, Newton would go for days without food or sleep.
People who study creativity say there are several stages. First, you have to learn a great deal, and then you have to let that incubate and kind of bubble inside you, and then it will turn into something like an inspiration. That's what the alchemists were trying to do as well, and what Newton did so successfully.
Newton took on Galileo's challenge of refuting Aristotle. When he applied his mind to Aristotle's theory of falling objects and the orbit of the planets, he made the most important discovery of physics: gravity. It was groundbreaking.
When Newton thought about gravity, he had to conceive of the idea that two bodies can attract each other at a distance. And even today, we have trouble figuring out how that happens. I mean, how is it that the sun knows that Jupiter is there? Who knows?
The emerging breed of empirical scientists were very uncomfortable with the whole idea that something could affect another object without touching it, without being connected to it in some way. Then we have Newton coming in with this mathematical theory that accounts perfectly for astronomical observations, but it requires there to be a force between these two different objects, and there's nothing in between. So he was basically stuck with action at a distance, no matter how uncomfortable it made him or anybody else.
Newton was also the first to discover the properties of light and believed that light was composed of particles.
Aristotle's worldview didn't accept the idea of atoms, of indivisible components of objects. But it's clear from, for instance, Newton's writings on light that he had some definite ideas along those lines, that he thought of light as being a stream of tiny, rapidly moving particles of some sort, corpuscles, as he wrote.
In 1687, Newton published his masterwork, Principia, and he became an international sensation.
Hey, welcome back to Potty Science. Actually, Jeremy has a quite the introspective on science versus mysticism. Tell me, Jeremy.
That we as a people, we can only move as fast as our slowest people.
So you can only move as fast as I can go.
Yeah, like
AKA speed bump.
Like scientists are sitting out there, and we have these flat Earth fucks, these idiots. Instead of scientists actually doing science, now they have to stop and go, okay, no, these dudes, this shit's really round. No, it's not. So they now have to spend time debating the idiots. Just like doctors have to spend time saying, no, vaccines do not cause autism, you dumb shits, instead of working on something more important. So these idiots are actually slowing us down as a society instead of moving us forward.
I would agree with that. Like, there's a lot of slow people who don't catch on, or they're hooked mentally into the conspiracy theory kind of thing, and they don't believe anything anybody's telling them. And because of them, we have to debate things that
are already fact,
that have been proven fact already.
Yeah, like evolution, we have to sit there and convince people we've evolved as a species. No, you can't see evolution on a grand scale. No, because that takes fucking thousands of years to happen.
The most proven theory of all science, by the way, just a little sidestep on there.
You know, and so scientists have to sit there and try to convince the slowest among us, no, we didn't sprout up from two people that lived in a fucking garden. We've actually evolved over millions of years.
So Trump not believing in global warming, even though there's plenty of evidence,
he's slowing us down as a country because now we have to spend time trying to convince this guy
and this
is real.
And others in the Congress and the Senate to think, hey, global warming may be real. We need to do something about it.
Yeah, and it's pretty sad that we as a society have this knowledge, but we have to convince other people that it's real. I heard a quote once that, unlike religion, science is real whether you believe it or not.
Right.
And
go ahead, Jeremy.
Well, and I want to add on to what he's saying, and from what I said before, where it's kind of a cynical view what I said before, but I want to add on to what he said. Yeah. So once you're an adult, and if you want to be ignorant, that's your call, but education is the key.
Yeah,
and I'm fine with kids if you want to teach them evolution, but also the Bible. In a weird way, I'm okay with that. But I think I don't want to put the Bible into public schools. I don't want to get all political or whatever. But I think to not teach evolution or science in general,
you were dragging society back.
As an adult, you can be an ignorant fucker. I don't give a shit, dude. But you were restricting your children of an open mind.
I give a shit if somebody's being ignorant. Like you see people on Facebook or wherever saying, I'm not going to vaccinate my child.
Right.
You're a fucking moron. I'm sorry about that.
Well, let me ask you this. If the children are already vaccinated and the children that aren't vaccinated don't get vaccinated, how is that a harm to people that aren't vaccinated?
Herd immunity.
Herd immunity. That's good.
What?
You just asked how children not getting vaccinated harm children that are.
Yeah.
It's the whole herd immunity thing.
So you're saying
we need a certain percentage of the population to be vaccinated against diseases to keep these diseases at bay or keep them minimal at best. When less people get vaccinated,
there's a chance.
Oh yeah, no, it affects the whole population.
Like, look, fucking measles came back.
Right. So you're saying that people that aren't vaccinated could spread measles to people, even though they are vaccinated.
Yes,
they can still get it.
Yes.
But that is the definition.
Shannon looks disturbed. Shannon, what's your thoughts here? What are you thinking about? Come on, talk to me.
That tasted awful. That's her concern. And I'd put some peppermint in there.
Peppermint? No, it's like water.
All right, so whether you get your kids you should get your kids vaccinated.
You should.
No doubt.
Really. Even, I remember
getting
vaccinated and everything.
Jeremy Borden may be autistic, but it's not from vaccination.
ADHD.
Well, plus if you say I don't want to get my kids vaccinated because it might cause autism, which it won't. You're saying I'd rather my kid potentially die of a serious fucking disease than have autism.
Right.
But that's the scare they put in you.
Good point. Good point. Good point.
That is a good point. So, as far as mysticism goes, there's people out there that think, no, vaccinations are full of mercury.
Which mercury is a valid concern,
but it's better than your kid dying from a disease.
Well, and so
the amounts of any of this shit in a vaccine is so minimal.
I know I'm not talking.
No,
you're the only one walked around and shit. How you doing?
Fuck you.
Our host is weird, man. I don't know what it's.
No, I'm just
scientifically
saying,
whatever.
That's like a big subject these days: is vaccination versus non-vaccination.
Yeah, and our scientists,
everything's a big subject
right now. Try to convince these people.
Right.
They're taking time.
I can't believe flat Earth is something I'm hearing about. That blows me away.
I'm with you.
Totally blows me away,
dude.
With you
on that.
And
how do you know until you revolve around the Earth?
Yeah, but there's so much. So, and I'm a kind of a nihilist. I'm a cynic, and I'm all don't give a shit about what the fuck about with people and everything. But you had the good point and everything, and I would say with science, I think children should have the option. Now, I'm not a huge fan of teaching religion in schools, but I would be willing to teach the Bible in schools if you would teach science at the same time and let the children choose. Whoever that individual is, choose. And I'm telling you, curious minds are brilliant minds, and that is where science is at. If you want to know what is real and what's not real, it is up to you as an individual, and then go from there.
So I am down with like public schools teaching religion if it's an elective. Like, let's say some kids say, I want to learn
religion.
Huh?
If they offer it to teach more than just religion, like theology as a whole,
right, versus
just say Christianity or Judaism, they taught.
Hold on, Shannon's shaking her head.
Theological class.
What's your thoughts on that?
It's just like warehouse.
Talk to me.
Teachers.
And if you teach religion, you teach all religions.
No.
Yeah, but there's
They're not teachers of teachism.
Teachyism sucks.
So you're saying that you don't believe in any religion teaching in school?
Well, no, I don't.
I don't believe.
I actually don't either. That was me trying to meet others halfway.
Right.
Yeah, to me, it's a waste of time. But so to me, it would be kind of like an extreme way of and it would be giving them what they want in a way. But you know what I mean?
Yeah. They're studying themselves.
Right. Of course she's right.
See, I'm thinking it's okay to teach religion.
Are giving you what they have just learned that day.
Right.
Which is from one book, and science is from thousands and thousands of books. Religion comes from one book. And, you know, that's the beauty of being a religious person. You can read one book 1,000 times. But being a scientist, you have to read one book 1,000 book one times. That was a horrible way. It could have been smoother, but you get my point. The fact is you have to do work to do science. Religion is easy. It comes to you. It just says, and I agree, Jesus is the man. I love Buddha and, you know, all that happy horse crap. But the point is, that's philosophical in who you are as an individual, but as far as the world goes and how things exist, science is the way it goes, and it's difficult. Science is difficult, and if you're not a scientist and you don't give a shit, go on your iPhone, go on your iPhone pad, and enjoy yourself and watch some fucking YouTube, and I don't give a fuck about anything about that, but scientists know what science is, and enjoy yourselves.
What do you think to that, Shannon?
I've been saying it. I've been spouting it off the whole time you've been talking. My opinion.
All right. Well, that kind of wraps up our science versus mysticism.
No, not a versus.
No.
No. Versus. Mathematics, science, mysticism. There's a layered thing going on there.
You're right. There's different beliefs, and each one of them are not wrong. Is that right?
Like nature and nurture. The reason why that argument is still happening is because neither is right. They're both right. It is a combination of both.
Okay. So science versus mysticism versus religion versus whatever. You all take the cumulative evidence and come to your own decision. Is that right?
Your own decision. I mean, whether it's right or wrong, you're going to do it. But the point is, yeah, come to your own decision with the tools that you have.
This is potty science. Yo, comment below. I want to hear your thoughts versus anything. I mean, anything science related or mysticism related or religion related. I don't care. Just fucking comment below. This is potty religion. No, potty science.
Ah, that's going to be a whole new fucking
Don't drink while you're talking about science. So anyway, join us next week. We'll try to throw up some follow-ups. Thank you, and thank you for joining the podcast. Potty religion. Potty science. Potty news.
Potty this.
Potty that. Whatever.
For the love of fuck, dude. I fucking... that was the part that I was trying to be serious about, and fucking nope.
Damn.
No, that was a good discussion, man.
Yay!
Albert Einstein. In some ways, Einstein was a mystic at heart. As a child, he had observed the movements of a compass needle and vowed that he would one day learn the mind of God. Like Newton, he would enter an altered state of consciousness which he called mind exercises, and intuitively arrive at his discoveries. Only later, Einstein would back them up with formulas and proofs. That year, Einstein published 5 papers of new physics in the journal Annalen der Physik, theories that rewrote the rules of the universe. In it, he posed his theory of relativity, which held that time and space are relative, changing concepts, not absolutes.
Newton developed these wonderful things, the laws of motion and gravity and so on, which appeared to be just like clockwork. And it made everybody pretty happy, even though it was revolutionary at its time, because they discovered that the universe was a big giant clock and it all worked in an orderly way. Einstein came along and said, well, yeah, that could be true, but also it's relative. And it turned it all upside down again.
In Einstein's autobiographical notes, he would ask Newton for forgiveness for revolutionizing the science of physics. Einstein had finally solved a contradiction Newton had observed an age ago in the behavior of light, that it acted like a wave, but sometimes like a particle. And in the process, he finally proved Newton's intuition about the existence of atoms.
The photoelectric effect, as it's called. If you shine a bright light onto a piece of metal, it'll knock electrons loose. And the wave theory was simply not accounting for the details of how that happened. Then came Einstein in 1905 and was able to account for the photoelectric effect perfectly by saying that when light interacts with the metal, it comes in discrete bundles of energy that depend only on the frequency of the light and not its intensity. So it's still a wave. I mean, frequency is fundamentally a wave concept, but it's acting like a particle.
Years later, Jung reported that Einstein's genius had influenced his entire body of intellectual work. And Einstein's photoelectric theory laid the foundation for the later contradictions of the subatomic world, quantum physics. Consciousness appeared to affect the universe.
Einstein had a very strong, basically philosophical conviction that a theory of physics should be complete, that if you know everything there is to know about a system, you can predict everything that it will do.
Hello everyone, and thank you for sticking around this long in the Body Science podcast, our first episode. Most of them should not last as long as this one did, and we will try to not dig into politics and science quite as much, but obviously some subjects it's difficult to avoid, but personally I would rather stay away from it, but again, a little difficult to do. But this is the part that we're going to try to do every episode, and that is a book, biography, and a lesson. This one we're going to shorten up pretty quick because of the length of everything else leading up to this. The books, I'm just going to make it quick. I call them scholastic books, but they are books that you would have in a classroom, and within those, you know, math or science books, you'll have your equations, and they will run through a linear study of whatever the subject is. Also, obviously, your social sciences, psychologies, and all that stuff. But I think they're an underrated book style for after you're out of school. Most people, once you're out of school, you just want to say no more. But I just want to throw this in real quick because the good thing about these books, after you're not under the pressure of getting quizzed or having a test or anything like that, the fact that you can study them on your own, there's really no pressure, at your own leisure and your own time and what have you from there. There's something, I love them. They're probably my favorite of the books. But I just want to throw that out there in this episode because, like I said, I want to make them kind of short and sweet this episode for this book's biography and lesson. The biographies we really kind of covered earlier. It's Hippocrates and Galen. The one thing with Hippocrates that we really kind of didn't discuss during the podcast earlier is Hippocrates Bench, and he invented basically a bench that you lay the body out on, and you're able, say, a broken femur, which is a major medical issue. What this does is it will secure the body, take leather bindings to the leg, stretch the leg out, allow the physician to line the bone up and take care of it from there. One thing with the physician's bench, or Hippocrates bench, is it did lead to the medieval, some of the torture methods, but it's still used today in a way with traction, which is a technique of stretching a limb and lining up bones and whatnot. But Hippocrates did that back in the day. It was pretty amazing. We really kind of covered him, I think, through the discussion for the most part, but Hippocrates is really considered the father of medicine. He's basically 460 BC to 370 BC. He separated medicine from philosophy, and he did the first medical library. I think there's about 60 writings. I don't know if you call them scrolls or books, but I don't think they bound them quite like books. They're probably several scrolls in one subject or whatever, but he was able to take education from other, he didn't invent medicine in and of itself per se, but he really was the first to kind of consolidate it and make it a practice, I guess, in a weird way. The other one is Galen, and he interests me because where Hippocrates kind of had a location, one single location in studied and kind of had people come to him more or less. Galen is really a field surgeon, like a military medic would be a great way to discuss him, because he would be, I mean, he did gladiators and stuff, but he also did a lot of work for the Roman Empire, and in his early days would travel with, you know, the soldiers, and, you know, in a battlefield, there's pretty much the worst of the worst as far as trauma style injuries to the human body and stuff, and he did a lot to help, but he also learned a lot because of that nature of environment and everything that he was in. So the lesson on this one, I'm just going to set this up real quick, and then I'll have a video following this if you're interested, and it is about Pythagoras and the study of music. I think it's amazing what he did with this. There is a myth about Pythagoras and how this started, which I think is interesting. Whether it's true or not, who knows, and who really cares? But the myth is Pythagoras was walking past a blacksmith, several blacksmiths one day, and there were two or more blacksmiths hammering armor over anvils, and the sound of the pitch of two different anvils with two different blacksmiths hitting metal armor over these anvils was pleasing to him, and he was intrigued. So he went over, he weighed them, and by weighing something you find out the mass, and he found that the mass of these two things, I'm not sure the first one, but probably 2 to 1 an octave. But the big things that Pythagoras discovered as far as music goes is the octave, the fifth, and the fourth. And these are still used today in music, especially those out there that do rock or metal music, string music, being a guitarist or what have you. The fifth chord, the power chord, is very popular, and a lot of riffs and whatnot use that. The octave, so all of these you can imagine a string and then dividing them. So an octave would be 2, so you divide the string into 2 sections. Basically you have it into 2 halves, and the octave is 2 to 1. The fifth chord is you cut it into thirds, and the ratio is 3 to 2. The 3 would be the full length of the string, and then the 2 would be 2/3 of the length, and that would be a fifth chord. The fourth would you cut the string into 4 equal sections, and you would have the 4, which would be the full string, to 3/4, and that would be a fourth chord. There's other ones related to this, and the fact that music is kind of infinite as long as you can hear it within the, you know, the auditory spectrum and whatnot. But you can follow up more on that after this little rant that I got going on here, and I actually think that this is about it. If you stuck around this long, congratulations. This was a long one. Hopefully you stick around for future ones. We are going to try to keep doing stuff that's interesting, but myself, anything science related is interesting. But we will shorten them out a little bit and try to cut politics out as much as possible, but inevitably that'll get mixed in. Other than that, thank you very much, and watch more podcast stuff. Thank you very much. Ciao.
Today's class is about how math and physics fits with music. So today I'm going to talk about the Pythagorean fifth circle and Pythagoras' comma. And for this exercise, I've already assumed that you know about the Pythagorean theorem. It states that the square of the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the squares of the other 2 sides. But again, the focus of today's class is another less famous algorithm that he also discovered. But first of all, who was Pythagoras? Well, he was quite a character who was a Greek philosopher, great mathematician, and a scientist who lived 580 before Christ. Again, Pythagoras did not only specialize in trigonometry, but also found some very interesting mathematical links in the structure of tonation and notation. And another of his groundbreaking algorithms is the Pythagorean fifth circle and Pythagoras' comma. The piano has 88 keys, 7 octaves, and a frequency spectrum from A0, which has 27 Hz, and C8, which has 4,186 Hz. And you may wonder what an octave is. Well, an octave includes 8 semitones from C to C or F to F. And this has a relevance on the fifth circle. This was just some fun facts, but still related to the fifth circle, which I'm now going to talk about. So, what is a fifth circle? The fifth circle works like a clock. It has 1 to 12 tones. It consists of 2 pitches, major and minor keys. And the minor keys is the corresponding key signatures to the major keys. But what's the meaning of the corresponding key signatures? Well, A minor is 1.5 semitone lower than C major, for example. And by increasing fifths, or more specifically continuing 5 semitones clockwise from the top of the circle, the key of C has no sharps or flats. Walking from C, 5 semitones from C, C, D, E, F, G. G has 1 sharp, and D has 2 sharps, and so on. And if you're proceeding fifths counterclockwise, or the more fancy word walking subdominant, you know, if you're going to the left from the apex, the key of F has 1 flat, the key of B has 2 flats, and so on. And at the bottom of the circle, where the key of F sharp and G flat meets, it creates 2 unharmonically equivalent notes, which I'm going to talk about later. But the same happens with the corresponding key signatures where E flat and D sharp overlap. But Pythagoras discovered that there was a problem in the system. 12 fifths above each other should be the same as 7 octaves on top of each other, but it's not. It's a little delta, it's a little interval, it's a little difference. And that difference is called a Pythagorean comma. And the frequency ratio for a perfect fifth is 3 divided by 2, 3 to 2, or 1.5. It's all the same, but you could spell it in different ways. And if we're multiplying 12 fifths with each other, the answer is 129.7463. And if we're multiplying 7 octaves on top of each other, you know, an octave has the frequency ratio 2, or 2 divided by 1, it's the same. The answer is 128. This small delta here, this small difference between 129.7463 and 128 is Pythagoras' comma. So as you see in this calculation, 7 octaves is not the same as 12 fifths. And Pythagoras' comma could even be defined as a small difference between 2 unharmonically equivalent notes, like C and B sharp or D flat and C sharp. And this ratio could be calculated as that 7 octaves removes from 12 fifths like this. 3 divided by 2 raised to 12 divided by 2 raised to 7 equals 3 raised to 12 divided by 2 raised to 19 equals 531,441 divided by 524,288 equals 1.01364. And if you want to write it in an easier way, you could write it in cents. But first you have to know that an octave has 1,200 cents. So 1,200 times logarithm 2, 531,441 with 524,288, which becomes 24 cents. The Pythagorean comma causes a 12-pointed star to fail to close. And the 12-pointed star represents the Pythagorean scale. And each line in 12-pointed star represents a just perfect fifth. And that small gap here has a central angle of 7.038 degrees. But how do you calculate this? Well, this angle of roughly 7 degrees is 23.46% of 30 degrees. And how do you know the gap has 30 degrees? Well, it's pretty logical actually. If you divide the whole circle's degrees, which is 360, with the 12 tones, the simple answer is 30 degrees.